Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
We're back live at Freedom Fest 2016, Las Vegas, Nevada. We have another amazing interview here. Lieutenant Randy Sutton, retired Las Vegas Police Department. He's now the spokesman for Blue Lives Matter. He's also an author. He's on CNN. You've seen him everywhere, especially over the last couple months, with a year and a half, with all this anti-police sentiment that we deal with on a regular basis. You're seeing these poor police officers attacked, ambushed. You name it, it's going on. Lieutenant, good afternoon.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
First of all, Blue Lives Matter. Can you tell everyone about that? Because I think it's an immensely important organization, and the work you guys doing are really bridging the gap between false pretenses of law enforcement and what the reality is.
Exactly, and that's the reason why we came into being. Blue Lives Matter is in reality a real grassroots group of people, of police supporters. It's made up of police officers, their families, and people that support law enforcement. It's not a funded organization like Black Lives Matter, who of course has millions and millions of dollars being funneled to it through George Soros.
Oh, but it's grassroots.
Grassroots, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, right. It's a populist movement.
That's the name of the bank. It's the Grassroots Bank.
So Blue Lives Matter is simply some active duty police officers that are trying to combat the false narrative of law enforcement. And the reason that they asked me to be their spokesman is because these are active working cops, and they know that because unfortunately the new reality is that police officers around the country no longer really have a First Amendment right. That their right of free speech has been taken away from them by their own police administrations, and that if you have an opinion that does not go along with the party line, with the politically correct narrative that many police departments are adopting, then you face discipline anywhere from a suspension up to termination.
Well, I think that's most prevalent recently in San Jose during the Donald Trump rallies, where you had a lot of people asking why the police weren't doing more. And the simple fact is you have an appointed chief who lives under the political correctness guidelines of the mayor who appointed him and essentially has power over him, which is just ridiculous. And he knew, and the cops knew, that if they stepped out and did what they were supposed to do, they would be put all over the news. They'd be lambasted. Their own city would have been happy to put them in front of a camera talking about how they went against their narrative, et cetera, et cetera. You see the politics getting into policing more and more when the two should not coexist in any way, shape, or form. There's a big difference between setting policy and saving lives.
And unfortunately, we're seeing this all over the country. It's happened from East Coast to West Coast. I was just in Baltimore doing a speaking engagement for a very large police union. And after the speaking gig, I was having dinner with one of the heads of the police unions, and he showed me a photograph, and it was a smiling police officer in uniform in a patrol car, and he had the words "Happy Easter" on it. And he showed it to me. I said, "Well, that's really nice. I mean, it shows humanity. It shows a good face for law enforcement. It shows they're human and a nice greeting." He says, "Yeah, you're right. Too bad that he got suspended for it."
Of course he did, because how dare he put Easter, which is related to a religion, and use the police car and do it without further. Am I going down the right road?
Exactly. You're going down exactly the right road. So Blue Lives Matter exists because we need to get the truth of what is taking place in the world out to the people that really will open their minds and take a look at it. So, but it's very interesting. In the days following Dallas, in 3 days following Dallas, we got over 100,000 more supporters in 3 days. We're now at almost 1 million people. And you know what? Here's the thing about all of the injustice that's been taking place. Now we're seeing the backlash that's coming towards those forces, those people that are trying to tear down the men and women of law enforcement. I think we're seeing probably more support than we've seen in a long time.
Which is enormous. And I would guess that probably 9/11 was the last time you saw this sort of support that's starting to well up. Those on the left and those who have this anti-police narrative, which is just insane to me, they love to point to all of these events before any facts come out and talk and create this false narrative and get everyone into this uproar, and then they never follow the case. The media certainly doesn't follow the case. They don't tell you the reality of it. When you go back to Ferguson, the officer whose life was destroyed by media, and you get all the way through a grand jury and find out it's exactly how he said it happened. He was in fear for his life. He had no other choice at that moment than to pull his weapon. The grand jury of his own peers found that to be true, and people still went crazy. There's no, because the media
they're still
just
not
keeps
accepting it.
Yes, which is, I don't understand. It's exactly what you wanted to happen. You wanted to have a full-bore investigation. You wanted all the facts to be out there. They listened. They did it. Not good enough.
Of course, it's not good enough because they didn't get the product that they wished to.
Exactly.
I mean, if you saw that exchange take place just a few days ago with Megyn Kelly and that moronic. I don't even remember, was it Hughley or Hughley or whatever.
D.L. Hughley.
The hell his name was. He absolutely refused to believe, even though there were been every investigation in the world, that Darren Wilson wasn't guilty of killing poor Michael Brown.
Right, who had robbed somebody earlier.
And was trying to take the officer's gun to kill him.
Right, trying to disarm him. And then...
Let's not let facts get in the way of a good narrative.
Right. And then in times when there was inappropriate behavior or a bad decision made or whatever, I go back to North Carolina, where there was the pursuit and the officer shot the guy.
I think it was South Carolina.
South Carolina, I apologize. And immediately everybody came out and said, hey, this wasn't right. Let's deal with this appropriately.
Exactly.
Law enforcement even came out. You had a lot of professionals come out and say that was not the way he was trained. That's not how he should have done it. And even the community understood immediately, and they didn't rally. They didn't go crazy.
Right.
They were completely accepting of the fact of, hey, this was inappropriate, and it's being dealt with appropriately.
Exactly.
And most people don't realize that when you talk about law enforcement, those who... I even hate to say misuse authority because sometimes it's a simple mistake.
Right.
So it's still less than, I think, 1.5% as far as the overall. And so you're looking at the other 98.5% who are out there for sometimes lousy money. I believe you started your career in New Jersey. Am I not right?
Well, let's talk about lousy money for a minute.
Yeah.
Because I am angered about something that I just discovered. And back in October, a police officer was murdered in Pennsylvania. He was answering a domestic dispute call and was shot to death. And he was a 20-year veteran. I just found out from a coworker of his that he was making $12 an hour.
Yeah.
$12 an hour, and he gave his life. And we got Hillary Clinton running around the country like a freaking moron, screaming for $15 for people at McDonald's.
Right.
Wait a minute. What is anyone else here seeing an injustice here?
Horrific injustice. And it's funny because I told you this when I had you on my Edge of Liberty show. My father was a police officer, and I can remember him doing extra duties overnight, walking some hellacious areas for $8 an hour. And that was back in the 80s.
Right.
And this gentleman, this officer, was killed for $12 an hour.
Yeah.
And when you look at law enforcement, it's so funny how many other industries are regulated for the most part as far as their pay. Good luck trying to find a doctor for under $80,000 a year and some other expertise. There are so many places. I was talking to a former police officer who was doing a class down, I want to say it was Alabama. And when the guy came to pick him up, one of the officers in the small little police department, this was in 2012. He picked him up in a 1999 Caprice Classic. And the guy explained to him as they were going to dinner in this small town how it's his take-home car, and he has to do the brakes and all the maintenance on it. And he made probably $14 an hour.
Yeah. This is. I watched not much of it, but I saw part of that CNN town hall, which was a joke actually, because it was. So, and I'm going to tell you a little story of CNN in a moment. But Mark O'Mara summed it up really, really well when he talked about we pay these guys next to nothing, and then we expect so much of them. And then when they make a mistake because they don't have the proper training, then we go after them and we destroy them.
Right.
And that I think he really said it the way it is. But now I want to point something about CNN, and this is very recent. In fact, this was in the last few days. I've given after the situation in Dallas, I've given probably 55 interviews, national, international, all over the media, and I've given I don't know, thousands of interviews over my career. CNN reaches out through Blue Lives Matter and wants an interview about Dallas. So I contact their producer in Atlanta, and I tell them who I am, and they said, "Okay, great. We've been waiting to hear from you. Can you come on this time and this date, and we'll set up the studio at this place." And I said, "Sure, absolutely, let's do it." And then she did something that I've never had happen to me. She asked me how I was going to answer the question.
Well, they want to know before they put you out there.
They did. They wanted to know, and then 10 minutes later, they called me back and canceled the interview.
Well, and I'm sure that's on the heels of, was it 3 weeks ago I saw you on a debate there with a woman, I can't even remember her name, where you, to say annihilated would probably be an understatement. I've never seen a human being on television stutter over their own words. It was amazing. But the problem is you attacked her with facts, and she was trying to attack you with emotion.
Exactly.
And the two can, when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to a lot of things in this world, the two can't always meet. You can be emotional about your job in a positive way, but when it comes to law enforcement and cops, it's facts. You have to use the facts and statistics. And it's amazing to me how the left just loves to throw this narrative down people's throats. They want to highlight things that were nothing. Oh, he said a bad word to me. Well, okay, that's a reality. People use foul language all the time. I grew up on the East Coast. You grew up on the East Coast. I'm now on the West Coast. I use language that even people on the West Coast are like, how dare you say that? Well, because where I came from, it was every third word out of everyone's mouth. It's not that I'm rude. It's just where I'm from. But we keep pushing this politically correct narrative. We keep pushing that cops are these evil people who wake up every single day looking for minorities to kill. Somebody's made the best analogy the other day. They said, do you think cops have this wide meeting in a park somewhere before they go out in their shift talking about who they're going to go after? No. Circumstances present themselves. Most police officers get called to a location and then something happens. I mean, there's proactivity as well. But you look at what we've also asked our police officers to do over the last 15 years. It used to be bring bad people to jail, police the community, and keep peace. Now they're social workers, they're drug interventionists, they have to be mental health specialists, politicians, all these different things that are not their job, but because nobody else wants to deal with it, they get thrown onto the cops.
No, the chief in Dallas really summed that up really well at the memorial. It's interesting. I've been following Dallas PD for a while because they've had so many issues. They've had terrible morale issues, not just because of the pay, which we're way below the average in that area.
$44,000.
Yeah, $44,000, right? But they've also had issues with their chief, and so they've had a lot of turnover, a lot of retention problems keeping their people. But I think that during this terror attack, I think that police chief, I thought he was absolutely stellar, and I think that the way he handled it will go down in history as probably one of the best managed crisis that I've seen in policing. And I have nothing but respect for that man.
I agree.
And he summed it up. He said exactly what you just said, that we were dump it on the cops. Dump everything on the cops. It's not the cops' fault. And we're getting dumped on everything. And they simply cannot keep up with that kind of workload.
No, and the amount of stress, and the other thing that I've talked about actually I was on with Ken the night of the Dallas shootings, we were doing a special covering it, is the amount of PTSD that is in law enforcement that gets heavily ignored.
Yes.
And has been for years.
Yes.
And I've seen numerous studies. Again, I have a ton of friends who are cops, and about the progressive PTSD in law enforcement, all the horrible things that they've seen, cops will never ask for help because that's not who they are. For the most part, it's just not the personality. But they're not offering the programs. Meanwhile, the science is there, the medical science is there. There is a tremendous amount of PTSD, and never mind after a Dallas-style incident or 9/11 or these hellacious shootings. I'm just talking about the things that they see on a regular basis.
You know what it is? I liken this to a drinking glass. That you start your career, and it's like the beginning. The water starts dripping into the glass. and you handle it fine. The class handles it fine for years and years and years. And suddenly there comes a point when that next drop starts spilling over. And that is more in effect with policing than it is in other areas, because it's the year after year exposure to misery and to death and to negativity, and the human psyche can handle it for a while. But unlike, maybe in the military where they're exposed to these, really heavy combat, and they're seeing in a space of a short period of time this horrible trauma where it affects them that quickly. Policing, while we're constantly looking at dead bodies and violence and all the the human
victims
nature,
and
human nature being what it is, but it's a slower progression, and then it affects people in a way that post-traumatic stress disorder is a very insidious kind of. In fact, there's one progressive state that has recently said that it's a disease and not an affliction, and that's a huge distinction now, because they can treat it and their insurance will cover it, as opposed to being punished for it.
Yes, which we've seen the punishment side of it again and again. And when we talk about the PTSD with law enforcement, people never discuss the suicide rate with police officers.
Right,
and I had a friend of mine who was a police officer who killed himself because of the stress of the job.
Yeah.
The stress on the family, the stress on the loved ones, what it does to marriages when you're working 3, 4, 5 nights a week, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then, God help you if BLM's going to protest the next day and you get forced in because you got to work all day for this. That stress as well, it leads to the end of marriages and a couple of other things. We never see that in the community. And that's something that I applaud you for starting to bring this stuff to the forefront, really starting to humanize the badge, if you will, which is one of the things that I see on social media all the time. But I think it's really important.
It's absolutely vital. I think that one of the, in fact, I posted about it yesterday. Some stars, singing stars, Alicia Keys, Beyonce, and a few other people just came out with a propaganda video. It's really that's the only thing it is, and they say Trayvon Martin died because he had a hoodie. Michael Brown died because he was a gentle giant, and all of this and they're sending out this misinformation, and they're doing this so insidiously that it is dehumanizing a police officer. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you devalue their lives.
Yes, they're no longer important.
Not only are they no longer important, but it actually incites greater violence, mm-hmm. Because they're not seen as human.
And again, it's become accepted in the community,
yes.
which is even more frightening.
Dangerous.
I can remember growing up, like I said, my dad was a cop, so I was fortunate to have a lot of police officers, right? But you grew up with that respect. You understood. It used to be a career where people were in awe because you were doing extraordinary things that other people could not do. You were the sheepdogs for the sheep, and you protected from the wolves, and everybody was okay with that. And
right.
now they're starting to jade who the wolf is. They're starting to jade who the sheepdog is. The sheep are always going to be the same. They're the poor victims no matter what. But they keep trying to flip-flop these roles and make people
right.
who are not victims into victims.
Well, they've been doing it very effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have, they don't have control of the media, but they certainly have the sympathies of much of the mainstream media, and when you have the kind of money behind them that George Soros has, you can manipulate public opinion.
Right.
And that has been done. And I tell you, I like them into ISIS. ISIS knows really how to use social media to get their ideology out. Mm-hmm. And that's the same type of structure that some of these anti-police groups, including Black Lives Matter, is doing right now.
Yeah, and, as horrible as it sounds, and Soros may be more appropriate for this, the Nazis did the same thing.
They did. Exactly.
It's all propaganda. It came from Bernays, who worked for the Woodrow Wilson administration, and it was used in the Nazi regime in order to further the propaganda, and that's how it starts. And those who use propaganda appropriately have a tendency to be the victor for a long time. And I think that's where law enforcement needs to be much better about it, and you need to have bosses and these chiefs come out and actually support their troops publicly.
Oh, Jesus, I wish if we could underline any statement in this entire radio, that would be it. I literally get hundreds of emails and comments from my viewers and my people that respond to my postings, and they're more afraid of their police chiefs and their administrations than they are of the people on the street.
Yep.
That's the thing that I think is probably the most heartbreaking that I could imagine.
I've talked to a couple officers too, and I think the reason is they understand the risks associated with being out on the street. I mean, you were in that world, right? So it's kind of expected, that risk, but
right.
I don't think they expect that from their administrators who are supposed to be with them. It's supposed to be the family.
Right. They talk about the team. They talk about the mission, and then they backdoor them by basically sacrificing them to the wolves when it becomes politically expedient to do that. And I think that's probably, if you were to examine the worst issue facing policing today, it's the lack of proper, courageous leadership of police departments.
Well, it's all political now.
Yeah.
So you're not hiring somebody because they're a great cop. Some places I'm sure are, and they're a great leader and they understand the mission of that department. You're hiring them because their friend became the mayor, or the mayor targeted them because they know that person can be manipulated. It used to be, I was always told, my father always said, that the police chief used to be the most powerful seat in the city.
Yeah.
Only because it was the line between good and evil. And it was the protection for everything else in that city. And it has since changed to where the mayor is essentially the police chief, and the police chiefs become proxies in a lot of these major cities and do the bidding of a guy who has no idea what they're
exactly.
who has no idea what they're talking about.
Right. And that, that's kind of I think that the average police chief lasts in his job 2 years, I think, and so if you look at it from their point of view, it's like, well, I got to save my own butt, so I'm gonna follow the party line here, and unfortunately, this demoralizes a police agency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you have a boss changing every 2 years, so if you're a cop for 30 years, every 2 years you're changing how you go to work. Yeah. And you're changing how you approach things because your boss is changing.
Right.
And that's demoralizing as well. And I can remember, like I said, my old man saying that he had a chief for 15 years, and everyone feared him and loved him all at the same time because he was a tough chief, but he backed his guys. He was a great chief, but they knew exactly for 15 years how to go to work and operate and not get in trouble and not be targeted, if you will.
Right. Well, everybody's going to get in trouble one time or another.
Right.
If you're doing it right.
Exactly. But it's how does the administration react when you make a mistake, and this is what real leadership is all about. Leadership needs to be competent. It needs to be compassionate. It needs to be fair, and it needs to be firm. And if you play by those 4 rules, then you're not going to have a morale issue. But if you let a political agenda enter into this, if you have a personal agenda that a police chief has a personal relationship one way or the other with a police officer and uses that power to either aid them when they shouldn't be or destroy them when they shouldn't be, then that's what causes the major morale issues.
And I think a bigger issue I could see coming out of that is that translates now to quality of service that the community gets.
Sure.
Because if the officers aren't supported, don't feel supported, they're not backed, they're afraid to do their job because they're going to lose a livelihood that supports a family and so forth. Are they really going to go out and do a particular stop based on, say, reasonable suspicion instead of just probable cause or whatever it is?
Right. You're talking about proactive policing, of course, which is where crime is solved. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing de-policing taking place all over this country because you'll never get into trouble for the traffic stop you don't make.
Right.
Yeah. And we're seeing that literally all over the country. And what's happening correspondingly? We're seeing the crime rates skyrocket.
Yes.
But you will not hear President Obama acknowledge it. he even said, "Oh, that's not happening." And the FBI director Comey says, "Oh, yeah, that really is happening."
Right. It's his own statistics. It's his own agency.
Exactly.
It's the FBI.
Just two questions for you. As someone who lives in urban America and has seen the police become so demoralized and disheartened by Black Lives Matter, by mayors throwing people under the bus, I wanted to get your commentary on first the governor of Minnesota and the governor of Louisiana, who threw the police. Well, this is my commentary. Threw the police under the bus with a false narrative that it was white police officers that killed those gentlemen, when in self-defense in each particular case, it was Latino police officers that protected themselves accordingly. The second thing I want to ask you is your thoughts on the fact that 5 families woke up on Saturday morning and found out that their father wasn't coming home. And they were killed because of the color of their skin, not because of the content of their character. I just wanted to get your commentary on that.
Yeah, well, you hit it right on the head. I watched the press conference by that spineless piece of human trash that is called a governor up in Minnesota, and I mean this is literally like the day after, even the day of, without having any facts whatsoever
At all.
He declared it a racist killing. Well, you may as well light the freaking torch, right? That's
just pouring the gasoline.
Let's go right now. I mean, I was incredulous. First of all, he sounds like a bumbling idiot normally, but when he said those words, all I could do was shake my head and go, "This is why we have the issues that we have." And
yes.
of course, Obama did exactly the same thing from Poland.
Well, and
not knowing anything either.
And Obama started this with Gates in the Cambridge Police Department years ago.
This
is not certainly not a new thing. And now you have other governors, prominent politicians, doing the same thing, getting out before any sort. And instead of being a true leader and say, "Hey, we need to see what the facts are before we decide anything."
Yeah.
And then I'll give you comment. I have no comment until there's some sort of evidence given.
Well, I had, I have my own podcast. It's called Police Radio, the voice of American law enforcement, on the America Out Loud network. And I had as my guest a couple of weeks ago Tom Jackson, who was the police chief in Ferguson when the whole incident began. And let me tell you, man, this guy did not hold back. He told me exactly what happened, and getting backdoored by the governor of Missouri. The way they treated those police officers, the way they treated him, and they got their orders from the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
The Obama White House was pulling the strings on a lot of it, and they literally allowed that city to burn. They allowed criminality to run rampant, and it's listening to Tom Jackson was disheartening. It really was, because even though I knew it basically from everything I've been reading and all, to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, the way he was abused, and then he was treated like a scapegoat, just like Darren Wilson was.
Oh, yeah.
And they sacrificed those two men basically on the political altar of political correctness.
It's heartbreaking. 2 more questions, and I'll let you go. I know you're a very busy man. What's your message for America today about law enforcement? What's your message to young cops on how to maybe keep their mind clear through their career?
You know, I'll tell you, the message is probably the same for both. There is no more noble profession than being a police officer in the United States of America. The people of America really do stand behind you. There is a loud minority of individuals who know how to manipulate the media and the social media, and so it appears that there is this great deal of hatred. And the reality, I believe, is that most of America loves you, supports you, believes in you, and that you can never give in to that type of political diatribe, if you will. You must always understand that you are part of an incredible profession. You are touching lives in ways that most people cannot even grasp. You are part of what makes America great, and I believe that's the reality.
Lieutenant, where can everyone find your books and contact you?
RandyLSutton.com is my website. That's RandyLSutton.com. Check out BlueLivesOnline.com. That's Blue Lives Matter. Blue Lives Online. It's getting unbelievable exposure. The website has only been up about a month. We have millions and millions of hits, and of course Facebook. Look under Randy Sutton Public Figure. I answer all of my messages, and I do all my posting on there, and it's pretty entertaining.
I can vouch for that because I read your posts and having talked to you a few times and seeing you speak through, you can tell it's you when you're typing. There's no questions about who it is. Lieutenant Randy Sutton, thank you, sir. I greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We're
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Live on the floor from shrmedia.com at Freedom Fest 2016. Back in a moment.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.